The courtroom was alive with a quiet tension, the kind that seemed to press against the walls, squeezing every person inside with the weight of anticipation. Reporters whispered to one another, flipping through notes, adjusting their cameras to capture the first words the judge would speak. Lawyers shuffled papers nervously on polished mahogany desks, exchanging terse glances, while the jury sat upright, their expressions carefully neutral, but betraying glimpses of curiosity and unease. Even the air felt different that day, heavy, with the unspoken knowledge that the trial could leave lives irreversibly changed. At the center of the room, beneath the large, solemn seal of the court, Judge Harris sat, a figure of authority and quiet patience. His eyes scanned the courtroom, taking in every face, the families of the victim and accused, the legal teams, the press, and even the occasional passerby who had found a seat in the gallery. His gavel lay ready, a small wooden instrument, yet capable of delivering decisions that would echo far beyond the walls of the courtroom. The judge cleared his throat, the sound amplified in the tense silence, and called the court to order. In that moment, everything seemed to pause, as if the entire world were holding its breath in anticipation. Officer Daniels, a veteran of 15 years with the police department, sat near the front, a calm but vigilant presence. His German shepherd, Rex, a tall, sleek black dog with alert ears and intelligent eyes, rested beside him, perfectly still, a picture of disciplined focus. For years, Daniels had trained Rex to respond to the smallest cues, to sense danger, to detect evidence invisible to the human eye. But today, their partnership was going to be tested in an unusual way, one that neither officer nor dog could have anticipated. Among the crowd, a small figure sat perched on her mother's lap, her tiny legs swinging slightly. Emma, only 3 years old, had large, curious eyes that took in every movement in the room. She was too young to understand the gravity of the trial, yet old enough to notice details that escaped the attention of the anxious adults. Her mother, Mrs. Thompson, held her gently, whispering soothing words to keep her calm amidst the intimidating space. Emma's gaze flitted across the room, landing first on the large wooden benches, then on the serious faces of the lawyers, and finally on Rex. Something about the dog captured her attention entirely. The trial itself had been nothing short of a media spectacle. Weeks of testimony had been exhausting, with conflicting accounts, forensic evidence, and emotional pleas from both sides. The case involved a burglary gone wrong that had escalated into a violent confrontation, leaving a trail of questions and accusations. The courtroom was packed with individuals whose lives had been touched in some way by the event's neighbors, colleagues, family members, and curious onlookers hoping for justice. Reporters had been camped outside since the early morning, eager to capture every shocking twist, but nothing had prepared them for what was about to unfold. Emma's attention, however, remained fixed on Rex. She leaned slightly forward, pointing her small finger toward the dog. Her mother noticed the gesture and gently moved her hand to distract her, whispering, "Emma, honey, let's not bother the nice doggies." But Emma was insistent. Her tiny eyes locked on Rex, as though she could sense something extraordinary in him. The officers in the room, including Daniels, hadn't noticed at first. Children were unpredictable in their reactions. But something about her gaze hinted at an intuition beyond her years. Lawyers began their opening statements, the room vibrating with the weight of their words. The prosecution laid out its case, speaking of broken trust, stolen goods, and the emotional toll on the victim. The defense countered, painting a picture of miscommunication, unfortunate circumstances, and the need for careful consideration. Each word, each pause, seemed to resonate differently in the charged atmosphere of the courtroom. The jury scribbled notes furiously, attempting to process the complex layers of evidence and testimony. Everyone's eyes occasionally flicked to the child, unaware of how pivotal she might soon become. Rex, meanwhile, remained stoically at Daniel's side, eyes scanning the room with the practiced vigilance of a trained police dog. He noticed things the human eye could not: shifts in body language, subtle movements, the scent of evidence clinging faintly to clothing. Yet today, even Rex seemed attuned to a presence that was neither threat nor routine. He tilted his head slightly toward Emma, ears perking up. Daniels felt the shift, a subtle nudge in the back of his mind. There was something about this child, something the dog was responding to, and it piqued his professional curiosity. The gallery murmured as the judge called for a short recess. People stretched, whispered, and glanced at their phones. Emma, sensing movement, leaned forward again, pointing insistently at Rex. Her mother tried to pull her back gently, but Emma wriggled, her voice a soft, clear murmur. "Doggy knows." No one at first realized the significance of her words. A few heads turned, some smiling at the innocence of a child speaking in such a serious place. But to Officer Daniels, those two simple words sparked a cascade of thoughts. Could it be? The dog had been involved in the investigation, tracking evidence, detecting scents, and uncovering details invisible to humans. Emma's observation, innocent as it was, might hold a clue that adults had overlooked. Daniels glanced at Rex, who remained composed, eyes trained on the gallery and occasionally flicking to the small child. The dog's behavior suggested recognition, a silent acknowledgement that something in the environment was significant. Daniels felt a twinge of anticipation mixed with professional curiosity. The courtroom slowly filled back in as the recess ended. The tension returned, thicker now, almost palpable. Lawyers adjusted their notes, witnesses took their seats, and the jury straightened, sensing that the proceedings were about to resume with renewed focus. Emma, oblivious to the weight of her presence, giggled softly at Rex, who responded with a low, gentle whine of sound that seemed to capture everyone's attention. Reporters leaned forward, snapping photos, their lenses catching the subtle interaction. And in that instant, the stage was set for something extraordinary. Judge Harris called the court back to order, his gavel striking the block with authority. He glanced over the crowd, noting the unusual stillness, the curious energy lingering in the room. He would have no idea that in the next moments, a 3-year-old child's simple observation would bring the courtroom to an unprecedented halt. Lawyers spoke, witnesses testified, jurors watched intently, but somewhere in the quiet undercurrent of the courtroom, a tiny presence and a silent, intelligent dog were quietly changing the rhythm of the trial. Emma's mother whispered too, her again, attempting to keep her calm. But Emma's eyes never left Rex. She tilted her head slightly, as if listening for some unspoken communication. Daniels observed quietly, realizing that this was no ordinary moment. The child's innocence, paired with the dog's trained intuition, was creating a ripple in the room. A ripple that could, in time, reach every person present, altering perceptions, and revealing truths hidden in plain sight. By the time opening arguments concluded, the courtroom had reached a heightened state of anticipation. Jurors exchanged glances, reporters whispered notes, and the families held their breaths. Every adult, focused on evidence, testimony, and legal strategy, had failed to notice the subtle, yet crucial, connection forming between a 3-year-old child and a police dog trained to uncover truth. The story was no longer just about stolen goods or disputed testimony. It was about perception, intuition, and the extraordinary clarity that sometimes comes from the most unexpected sources. And so, in that tense, hushed room, the stage was quietly set. Emma's small hand, her innocent curiosity, and her keen observation were about to intersect with the meticulous work of Rex, the police dog, in a way no one could have predicted. A courtroom that had been filled with tension, anxiety, and the weight of legal consequence now held a secret thread of potential revelation, waiting for the first spark. That spark, however, would arrive in the form of two words, a child's. Voice, clear and unwavering. The courtroom settled back into an uneasy rhythm after recess. Lawyers shuffled papers, jurors sat upright, and the judge's gaze swept over the room with quiet authority. But amidst the professional tension, a single point of focus began to emerge: a 3-year-old girl named Emma. She had been quiet for most of the proceedings, observing the crowd, the polished wooden benches, and the serious faces of the adults. But her attention had settled entirely on Rex, the black German shepherd at Officer Daniels' side. Her tiny hands rested on her mother's lap, but her gaze never wavered from the dog. Emma leaned slightly forward, and with a voice that was almost startlingly clear for a child her age, she spoke 2 words: Rex knows. The words cut through the room like a sudden gust of wind. Lawyers paused mid-note, jurors blinked in disbelief, and even the judge's pen stopped its scribbling. A hush descended upon the courtroom, heavier than the quiet that had filled it before. Reporters lifted their cameras, capturing the unexpected moment, while witnesses glanced at one another, unsure if they had heard correctly. Officer Daniels' heart skipped a beat. He had been trained to notice patterns in behavior, subtle cues from both humans and dogs. The way Rex shifted slightly, ears perked toward Emma, indicated that there might indeed be significance in the child's words. Something in the dog's demeanor suggested recognition, a spark of awareness that he had seen many times in the field, yet never in the sterile confines of a courtroom. Daniels knelt slightly, careful not to startle either the child or the dog. His voice was low, reassuring. "It's okay, Emma. What do you mean?" Emma's mother, Mrs. Thompson, whispered nervously, trying to coax her daughter into silence. "Emma, honey, we're in a courtroom. Please sit quietly." But Emma was insistent. Her little finger pointed directly at Rex, and her voice, though small, carried a determination that demanded attention. "Rex knows," she repeated, louder this time, her eyes bright and unflinching. The courtroom, already tense with anticipation, fell completely silent. Even the air seemed to still, waiting to see what would unfold. The judge, raising an eyebrow, leaned forward on his bench. His voice carried authority, tinged with surprise. "Excuse me, did the child speak?" murmured Judge Harris, his tone gentle yet firm. The murmurs that had begun to ripple through the gallery faded instantly. Jurors straightened in their seats, leaning forward, captivated by the innocence and clarity of the statement. Witnesses paused, mid-thought, uncertain if this was some inadvertent interruption or the beginning of a pivotal moment. Detectives in the room exchanged glances. Detective Miller, who had been tracking evidence for weeks, felt a jolt of recognition. He remembered the details of the investigation scenes Rex had been involved in, evidence previously overlooked, and subtle clues that no human had noticed. Could a child's perception, paired with a police dog's trained instincts, point them toward something crucial? Miller's gaze flicked between Emma and Rex, noting the dog's focused attention and the child's unwavering gaze. There was a connection forming, invisible to all but the observant few. The defense attorney shifted in his seat uncomfortably, frowning. The prosecution, however, felt a mixture of intrigue and hope. This moment, so unexpected, had injected new energy into a trial that had been dragging for weeks. Both sides paused, recalibrating their strategies, realizing that the innocence of a child might have introduced a variable that no one had accounted for. Witnesses, previously confident in their statements, now shifted subtly in their seats, uncertainty creeping into their expressions. Emma's small voice rose again, insistently. "Rex knows," she repeated, her tone unwavering. Officer Daniels gently held her hand, kneeling to her level. "Do you mean something, Emma? "Can you tell me more?" The child's eyes sparkled as she nodded, still pointing at the dog. It was clear to Daniels that she had noticed something significant. Whether she understood its full importance was irrelevant. The pattern of recognition between child and dog suggested a connection no adult had considered. The courtroom murmured once more, quieter this time, a mixture of awe and curiosity spreading among the audience. Reporters scribbled furiously in their notebooks, capturing the scene for the cameras. Jurors whispered to one another, trying to interpret the meaning of a toddler's words in the context of complex legal proceedings. The families, both victim and accused, watched with wide eyes, unsure whether to dismiss the moment as innocent mischief or to recognize it as something extraordinary. Detective Miller quietly approached Officer Daniels, keeping his voice low. "We need to consider this. Rex has been to all the scenes. If the child's observation matches any of his work, it could be vital." Daniels nodded, already processing the implications. The dog, sensing the heightened attention, shifted slightly, as if responding to the unspoken instructions of both the detective and the child. Rex's tail was still, eyes fixed, ears alert. He was not just a trained animal. He was an active participant in an unfolding revelation. The judge cleared his throat, regaining control of the room. "Order in the court, please." Everyone remained seated. His voice, authoritative and steady, reminded the audience that, despite the unusual circumstances, the trial must continue. Yet even he could not ignore the strange energy radiating from the small girl and the dog. There was something extraordinary happening, an intersection of innocence and intuition, of instinct and experience, that challenged the standard proceedings of the courtroom. Emma's mother, still holding her daughter, whispered gently, trying to calm her excitement. "Emma, we're in a courtroom. Please be quiet now." But Emma's tiny body leaned forward, her eyes bright, her gaze unwavering. She was no longer a passive observer. She was an active presence, drawing the attention of everyone in the room. Her finger remained pointed at Rex, and the dog's awareness mirrored her intensity. The connection between them was palpable, undeniable, and filled the room with an electric tension. The prosecution saw an opportunity. The child's words, seemingly simple, hinted at a lead that could corroborate their case. They glanced at Officer Daniels, who remained stoically calm, though internally he recognized the weight of the situation. Rex had always been able to detect evidence and respond to subtle cues. Perhaps Emma, through her innocent observation, had noticed a pattern that adults had failed to see. The potential for a breakthrough hung in the air like a charged storm, waiting for the right moment to strike. The defense, equally alert, recognized the risk. A toddler's statement might appear insignificant to the casual observer, but the courtroom was now a stage for something extraordinary. Any indication that Rex, in combination with the child's observation, could lead to evidence meant a shift in strategy. The lawyers leaned forward, whispering among themselves, preparing to react to whatever revelations might come next. The courtroom, already tense, felt poised on the edge of a new chapter in the trial. Emma, oblivious to the weight of her actions, giggled softly at Rex's subtle movement. A dog responded with a low, gentle whine, alert yet calm, his eyes following the child's tiny gestures. Officer Daniels placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, silently communicating that she was safe. Detective Miller took careful notes, considering the implications. Everyone in the room could feel at a sense that the trial was no longer just a legal proceeding. Something extraordinary, almost unexplainable, had entered the room. A child's perception, a dog's trained instincts, and the silent understanding between them. As the lawyers resumed their presentations, Emma continued to watch Rex with fascination. Her small body leaned forward, her tiny hands gripping her mother's lap, and her gaze never wavered. The jury, initially skeptical, found themselves drawn into the moment, captivated by the innocence and clarity of her observation. Witnesses adjusted their posture, sensing the unspoken significance. The courtroom had transformed from a place of procedural routine to a stage of subtle revelation, guided by the quiet presence of a child and her canine companion. The hours passed with mounting tension. Every statement, every gesture, every shift in Rex's posture was scrutinized. The attorneys now considered the implications of the child's words, adjusting their arguments to account for the unexpected. Variable. Judge Harris maintained decorum, but even he could not hide his intrigue. Emma's voice, soft yet commanding, and the dog's focused attention had created an entirely new dynamic in the room. It was a reminder that truth often reveals itself in the most unexpected ways, through those least expected to see it. By the end of the day, the courtroom was filled with whispers of astonishment and curiosity. Reporters outside speculated wildly, jurors discussed the unusual turn, and families sat in stunned silence. Emma, unaware of her impact, rested her head against her mother's chest, eyes still occasionally drifting to Rex. The dog, patient and poised, remained a sentinel at Officer Daniel's side, as if aware that the day's events had only just begun to unfold. And so, the first spark had been ignited. A child's voice and a dog's instinct had collided in the quiet power of observation, sending ripples through a courtroom, unprepared for such a moment. What had seemed like an ordinary day of testimony was now transformed into the beginning of a revelation that no one could have predicted. The stage was set for truths to emerge, mysteries to unravel, and the power of innocence to reshape the course of justice. The courtroom's murmur of whispers had barely settled when Emma's voice rang out again, clear and unwavering. Rex knows. Heads turned in unison. Lawyers froze mid-gesture. Jurors blinked in disbelief, and even Judge Harris paused, pen hovering over his notes. The simple words of a 3-year-old carried a weight that none of the adults could have anticipated. In that instant, the room shifted. A hum of tension became almost electric, a quiet anticipation that threaded through every person present. Emma's tiny figure, perched on her mother's lap, had become the center of attention in a courtroom that had been dominated by adult authority for weeks. Officer Daniels leaned closer, kneeling to bring himself to Emma's level. He had seen moments like this before, though never in such a formal and charged setting. The subtle cues from Rex were unmistakable. The dog's ears pricked, tail still, and body slightly tense, eyes focused entirely on the child. Rex's training allowed him to recognize potential leads, unusual behavior, or evidence that human senses might miss. And Daniels knew instinctively that the dog was acknowledging something significant in Emma's observation. Her words might hold a clue, a detail that could shift the course of the trial. The gallery erupted into quiet gasps, some stifled laughter, and the inevitable flashes from cameras. Reporters scribbled rapidly, realizing that they were witnessing something extraordinary. Even the most seasoned journalists paused, captivated by the scene unfolding before them. Emma's innocent observation, combined with the unspoken communication between her and Rex, had drawn the courtroom into an almost surreal moment. Families held their breath. The victims' relatives exchanged anxious glances, hope flickering in their eyes. The accused's family leaned forward, worry and confusion etched into their faces. Every adult realized, simultaneously, that this child might possess a perspective that adults had overlooked. "Order," Judge Harris finally called, his voice steady but tinged with curiosity. "Let the record reflect that the child has spoken. Miss Thompson, can you clarify what she means?" Emma's mother whispered softly to her daughter, attempting to calm her excitement, but Emma's attention remained fixed entirely on Rex. Her small hand waved slightly, pointing again toward the dog. "Rex knows," she repeated, with a confidence that defied her age. It was almost as if she were imploring the adults to notice what she had already seen. Detective Miller approached Officer Daniels discreetly, keeping their voices low. "We should consider this. Rex has been involved in all critical evidence searches. If Emma's observation is pointing to something he has reacted to before, it could be vital to the case." Daniels nodded, the professional gears in his mind spinning. The courtroom was no longer just a stage for testimony and argument. It had become a site of revelation, where the perspective of a child and the instincts of a highly trained dog might converge to uncover truth that had previously eluded everyone. The defense team exchanged uneasy glances. What did it mean that a toddler, not yet old enough to grasp the full scope of legal proceedings, had uttered two words that now captured the attention of the entire room? The prosecution, sensing opportunity, adjusted their strategy subtly, leaning into the possibility that the child's words might corroborate their narrative. Witnesses shifted uncomfortably in their seats, realizing that the focus of the courtroom had unexpectedly turned toward the child and the dog. The room had transformed from one of procedural monotony into an arena of possibility, suspense, and awe. Emma's small hands gripped her mother's lap, tiny fingers curling nervously as she spoke again. "Rex knows." Each repetition carried a calm certainty, a clarity that seemed far beyond her years. Officer Daniels placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, kneeling close to reassure her. "Do you mean something, Emma? Can you show me?" The child's wide eyes sparkled. She nodded, tilting her head slightly as though listening to Rex. The dog's response was subtle but unmistakable. A soft whine, a shift in stance, and an unwavering gaze that seemed almost human in its intent focus. The judge observed quietly, watching the interaction unfold. For decades, he had presided over cases where evidence, testimony, and witness credibility determined outcomes. Rarely had he seen a courtroom so captivated by a child's observation. Even in high-profile cases, surprises often came in the form of new evidence or a witness's testimony. But here, innocence and intuition had taken center stage, altering the rhythm of proceedings in ways the adults had never anticipated. The courtroom's energy had shifted, charged with the potential of discovery. Emma's mother whispered again, trying to calm her daughter's excitement, but Emma remained focused, pointing insistently at Rex. She had noticed something, a connection, a detail invisible to the adults, yet clear to her. Officer Daniels's mind raced, recalling the specific locations and items Rex had investigated in relation to the case. Could the child be pointing out something the adults had overlooked? The possibility sent a jolt through him. Rex, trained to detect scent, subtle movements, and the faintest traces of evidence, was responding as if confirming Emma's intuition. Jurors leaned forward, whispering among themselves. Witnesses looked confused, trying to continue their testimonies, while stealing glances at the small child and the dog. Lawyers recalibrated their strategies, understanding that the courtroom had become something more than a simple trial. The focus had shifted, imperceptibly but unmistakably, toward observation, instinct, and the unexpected clarity that only a child and a dog could bring together. Reporters scribbled frantically, capturing every detail, knowing that this unusual interaction could dominate headlines for weeks. Detective Miller motioned Officer Daniels toward the evidence table. If Emma is correct, Rex's response might lead us to a clue we haven't fully analyzed yet, he said quietly. Daniels nodded, knowing that the next steps required care. The courtroom watched, unaware that the ordinary proceedings were about to intersect with something extraordinary. Emma, still leaning forward on her mother's lap, had no idea of the significance her voice and gestures were creating. She was simply reacting with the sincerity and instinct of a child who noticed what adults had missed. A defense attorney cleared his throat, attempting to regain composure. "Your Honor," he said cautiously, "may we request a brief recess to assess the situation?" Judge Harris considered, recognizing the unusual circumstances. "Granted," he replied, tapping his gavel lightly. "We will reconvene shortly. All parties remain present." The murmurs in the courtroom softened, but did not disappear. Every adult understood that something remarkable had occurred. A child's simple statement had created a pivot point, a spark that could change the trajectory of the trial. During the recess, Officer Daniels knelt beside Emma. "You're very smart," he whispered gently. "Do you see something that we should know about?" The child's eyes lit up. She pointed again at Rex, speaking softly, her words almost a whisper, but perfectly clear. "He knows." Daniels's heart raced. Rex's calm, attentive posture confirmed that the dog had picked up on a subtle clue that aligned with the child's perception. Together, they had created a moment of connection that none of the adults had anticipated, a bridge between innocence and trained experience. The gallery observed the exchange. Curiosity piqued. Reporters whispered excitedly among themselves. Jurors discussed in hushed tones the possible implications of the interaction. Families leaned closer, sensing that the day's events were no longer typical. The courtroom had transformed from a site of legal procedure to a stage of revelation, where a child's keen observation and a dog's trained instincts intersected to uncover truths hidden in plain sight. Every adult present realized they were witnessing something extraordinary. As the trial reconvened, the courtroom energy shifted. Lawyers approached their arguments with new caution, adjusting phrasing and strategy to account for the subtle yet undeniable impact of Emma's observation. Witnesses spoke with heightened awareness, knowing that the child and the dog were active participants in the unfolding narrative. Officer Daniels guided Rex subtly, allowing the dog to respond to cues in the environment while remaining calm and composed. Every interaction was laden with significance, creating an atmosphere thick with anticipation and focus. By the end of the day, the courtroom had settled into a tense rhythm. The child and the dog remained focal points of attention, their silent connection resonating through the proceedings. Every adult in the room understood that Emma's two words, simple, yet profoundly insightful, had introduced a variable that might ultimately influence the outcome of the trial. And as the gallery emptied, with whispers of astonishment spreading outside the courthouse, one fact became undeniable: the smallest voices, paired with instinct and intuition, sometimes hold the power to reveal what adults cannot. In the quiet aftermath, Officer Daniels knelt beside Emma once more. "You've done something amazing today," he whispered. The child, unaware of her impact, smiled innocently and patted Rex's head. The dog responded with a subtle wag, eyes focused, ears alert. Together, they had altered the energy of a courtroom, captured the attention of every adult present, and planted the seed for a revelation that would soon unfold. In the quiet, tense room, the stage was set for truths to emerge in ways no one had anticipated. The courtroom fell into a stillness heavier than any silence the judge had ever presided over. Every pair of eyes was fixed on Emma, perched delicately on her mother's lap, and Rex, the black German shepherd, sitting alert beside Officer Daniels. The child's repeated two words, "Rex knows," had pierced the formal atmosphere like a jolt of electricity. Lawyers paused mid-gesture, jurors leaned forward instinctively, and witnesses froze mid-sentence, unsure of what to say next. Cameras flashed, capturing the moment for news outlets, but the lens couldn't fully convey the strange, almost mystical connection forming between the toddler and the dog. Officer Daniels knelt down slightly to meet Emma's gaze, his professional instincts mixed with genuine awe. He had seen many critical moments in his years as a canine handler, but none like this. Rex's body language was precise, disciplined, and alert. The dog's gaze never left the child, ears pricked, head slightly tilted, tail still yet ready. Something about Emma's presence seemed to trigger recognition in Rex, a cue, imperceptible to everyone else, that spoke of uncharted understanding. Daniel's heart raced. He knew, as he had in countless field operations, that the dog's focus indicated a lead. But in a courtroom? That was unprecedented. Judge Harris's expression shifted subtly, a mixture of curiosity and cautious intrigue. He had presided over thousands of trials, yet he had never encountered a moment like this, a trial so dominated by a child's perception. His gavel rested in his hand, yet it felt heavier, as though the simple presence of a toddler had infused the room with a tension the law alone could not control. The gallery leaned forward collectively, sensing that the ordinary proceedings had transformed into something extraordinary. Every person in the room, from jurors to reporters, felt the shift, though none could fully articulate why. Emma's mother, Mrs. Thompson, whispered in her daughter's ear, attempting to soothe her excitement. "Emma, sweetheart, it's just a dog. Sit quietly, please." But Emma was resolute. She pointed at Rex again, her small fingers trembling slightly, and repeated her words. "Rex knows." There was no fear in her voice, only certainty. It was the kind of clarity that could only come from genuine observation, untainted by adult assumptions. Officer Daniels's pulse quickened. He had seen Rex react to countless subtle cues in investigations, but this time the cue came from the most unlikely source imaginable. The jurors exchanged puzzled looks. They had been instructed to focus on evidence, testimony, and legal arguments. Yet the courtroom had been hijacked by a simple two-word statement from a 3-year-old. Witnesses who had been confident moments before now shifted nervously in their seats. Some whispered to themselves. Others tried to ignore the child, but every instinct told them that something crucial had just been revealed. Even the defense attorney, usually composed and calculating, leaned back in his chair, brow furrowed, recognizing that Emma's words could not be dismissed lightly. Detective Miller, stationed near the evidence table, gestured subtly to Officer Daniels. "We need to consider this seriously. Rex has been involved in all the key investigative work. If Emma has noticed something we've overlooked, it could lead to a critical breakthrough." Daniels nodded, already scanning the room, noting every subtle motion of the dog and the child, every shift in posture, every glance, every minute. Movement could be a clue. And for the first time in weeks of meticulous investigation, Emma had provided an external observation that could point them toward something truly significant. The prosecution felt a ripple of hope. They had been struggling to make sense of conflicting testimonies and circumstantial evidence. And now, a seemingly insignificant voice, one completely innocent, had introduced a new thread into the case. They whispered quietly among themselves, recalibrating their strategy. Even the defense team understood that the courtroom's focus had shifted in a way that could challenge their arguments. A 3-year-old's perception and a police dog's trained instincts had become a force neither side could ignore. The judge raised a hand to restore order. "All right," he said firmly, yet with an undertone of curiosity. "We will proceed with the understanding that the child has spoken. Ms. Thompson, please ensure your daughter remains seated, and Officer Daniels, please keep your dog calm." The courtroom obeyed, but the energy remained charged. The ordinary rhythm of a trial had been disrupted, replaced by anticipation. Every adult present was acutely aware that the simplest observation might carry more weight than legal argument, precedent, or even witness testimony. Emma's gaze did not waver. She leaned forward, eyes wide, pointing at Rex. Officer Daniels knelt beside her, voice calm and gentle. Emma, can you show me what Rex knows? Is there something important? The child nodded, tilting her head slightly as if listening for a response from the dog. Rex shifted slightly, his gaze following the child's direction, ears alert, a subtle whine escaping. The synchronization between them was eerie in its clarity. Emma's observation and Rex's trained response had created a partnership in the courtroom that no one could have predicted. The gallery murmured softly. Witnesses who had been confident in their testimony felt the stirrings of doubt. Jurors whispered to one another, trying to interpret the significance of a child's words in a complex case. Reporters scribbled notes furiously, capturing the unfolding story that would dominate headlines. Families leaned forward, eyes wide. The victims' relatives looked with a mixture of hope and apprehension. The accused's family stared, uncertainty etched on their faces. Every person in the courtroom felt it. Something significant was occurring, and it began with the smallest voice in the room. Detective Miller motioned toward the evidence table. If this is valid, we need to reassess the items Rex reacted to previously, he murmured. Officer Daniels agreed, noting subtle shifts in the dog's posture toward the corners of the room where evidence had been stored. The implications were staggering. A child's perception, combined with a highly trained canine's instincts, could reveal something that weeks of adult investigation had not yet uncovered. The courtroom was no longer simply a place of judgment. It was a stage for revelation. The defense attorney, attempting to regain composure, leaned toward the judge. Your Honor, may we request a brief recess to assess the situation? The child's statements may have implications we need to consider. Judge Harris nodded, understanding the unprecedented circumstances. Granted, he said. All parties remain present, and we will resume shortly. Murmurs filled the room again, but the tone had changed from routine procedural chatter to awe-laden anticipation. Everyone sensed that the trial had reached a turning point. During the recess, Officer Daniels knelt beside Emma once more. You've noticed something important, haven't you? He whispered. Emma's eyes sparkled, and she pointed again at Rex. He knows, she said softly, yet with an unmistakable certainty. Daniels's mind raced. Rex had already indicated subtle reactions to certain locations and objects. If Emma's observation aligned with these cues, it could direct the investigators to a piece of evidence that had previously been overlooked. A child's insight, innocent and unfiltered, was guiding a professional investigation in a way adults had not anticipated. The courtroom settled once the recess ended, but the energy remained thick with anticipation. Lawyers adjusted their arguments to account for the new dynamic. Witnesses spoke more carefully, aware of the silent communication unfolding between a toddler and a police dog. Jurors leaned forward, captivated by the unfolding mystery, the intersection of innocence, intuition, and trained perception. The gallery, too, seemed collectively suspended in the moment, recognizing that something extraordinary had intruded upon the formal process of justice. Emma's tiny hands gripped her mother's lap again, her fingers still pointing at Rex. The dog, calm yet alert, responded subtly to her cues. Officer Daniels knelt at her side, whispering encouragement. Together, they had created a chain reaction of observation and recognition that the adults in the courtroom could not ignore. The trial, which had been dominated by testimony, arguments, and procedural formalities, had shifted toward an entirely new dimension. Discovery led by intuition and innocence. A reminder that sometimes the smallest voices carry the greatest truths. By the end of the day, the courtroom had absorbed the profound implications of the interaction. Families, jurors, lawyers, and witnesses alike understood that Emma's words, though simple, had introduced an unanticipated variable. Officer Daniels and Detective Miller quietly exchanged notes, planning their next steps. Rex remained vigilant, eyes following every movement, a silent partner in the unfolding revelation. The day's proceedings had transformed from routine, legal examination into a narrative that intertwined innocence, insight, and trained perception. And so, the courtroom prepared for the next day, knowing that a tiny voice and a watchful dog had altered the trajectory of the trial. What had begun as a procedural session now carried the weight of revelation. Every adult in the room had been reminded that perception and intuition often reveal truths that logic alone cannot uncover. Emma and Rex, unlikely allies, had quietly set the stage for discoveries that would soon reverberate through every corner of the courtroom. The following morning, the courtroom buzzed with quiet anticipation. Word of Emma's observation had spread, though no one fully understood its implications. Reporters whispered among themselves. Jurors glanced curiously at the child, and families of both the victim and the accused sat on edge. Emma, oblivious to the tension she had created, clung to her mother's hand, her eyes fixed on Rex. The black German shepherd, disciplined and alert, sat by Officer Daniel's side, his body tense yet controlled, ears swiveling toward every sound. The connection between the child and the dog had become the focal point of the room. Detective Miller leaned close to Daniels before the proceedings began. We need to act carefully. If Emma's instincts are correct, Rex might lead us to evidence overlooked by everyone. But we must make the process transparent and legally valid. Daniels nodded, understanding the delicate balance of procedure and discovery. He knew Rex's trained instincts were powerful, but the courtroom environment required subtlety. Any sudden or dramatic movements could undermine the credibility of the investigation and the child's testimony. Judge Harris called the court to order. Today, we continue with witness testimonies and review of the evidence, he said, voice steady yet tinged with curiosity. The jurors leaned forward instinctively, while the lawyers straightened, papers rustling, adjusting to the unusual circumstances that had come to dominate the proceedings. Emma remained perched quietly on her mother's lap, her gaze unwavering, pointing ever so slightly toward Rex. The dog's posture mirrored hers, a silent acknowledgement that a discovery was imminent. The first witness of the day was a forensic analyst who had examined the scene of the burglary. They spoke carefully about fingerprints, traces of fibers, and the positioning of objects. But all attention in the courtroom subtly shifted as Daniels, kneeling at Emma's side, allowed Rex to respond to cues from the environment. The dog's nose twitched, and his head moved subtly toward a corner of the room where exhibits had been displayed. To an untrained observer, the movement was minor. But to those familiar with Rex's training, it was significant. He had detected something previously overlooked. Emma's small finger followed the dog's gaze, her tiny hand rising slightly in anticipation. She whispered softly to Daniels, "He knows." The words were almost lost in the courtroom's hum, but Daniels understood completely. He leaned closer to the child, whispering back, "Show me what you see, Emma." She nodded eagerly, her wide eyes full of clarity and determination. There was no fear, only the precise innocence of a child perceiving something adults had missed. Rex's focus reinforced her observation, and a silent communication passed between them, bridging intuition and training. Detective Miller directed. "Daniels subtly. Retrieve the exhibit he's indicating," he murmured. Daniels rose carefully, keeping Rex close, and approached the evidence table. The courtroom watched, tense and uncertain, as the dog and handler moved toward the display. Cameras clicked, reporters scribbled, and jurors whispered quietly. Emma's eyes followed every step, her tiny fingers pointing decisively. When Rex finally stopped at a specific item, a small piece of fabric previously deemed insignificant, Daniels crouched beside him, confirming the dog's detection. Judge Harris leaned forward, intrigued. "Officer Daniels, may I ask what the dog is?" "Indicating?" he asked. Daniels replied, calm yet measured. "Your Honor, Rex has detected a subtle trace on this item, something that aligns with a pattern he has recognized during the investigation." The child, Emma, noticed his reaction and confirmed the focus. A ripple of astonishment ran through the courtroom. For the first time, everyone realized that a toddler's simple observation could guide a trained police dog to potentially critical evidence. The forensic analyst examined the fabric more closely, eyes widening as they identified traces of a chemical that had not been linked to the primary evidence before. "This is significant," the analyst said softly. "It could indicate handling by a second individual or a connection we had not accounted for previously." Whispers filled the courtroom. Emma giggled softly, unaware of the gravity of her contribution, while Rex remained poised, head tilted slightly, ears alert, as if aware that his detection had real-world implications. The defense team shifted uneasily. Their objections were cautious, though procedural. "Your Honor, we request clarification on the admissibility of evidence highlighted by a minor's observation," the attorney said. Judge Harris considered the request carefully. "The court will allow discussion of this evidence, provided proper procedures are followed," he ruled. The decision reinforced the unusual but undeniable significance of Emma's observation and Rex's training. A child's insight had intersected with professional procedure in a way the law could accommodate, altering the course of the trial. Officer Daniels carefully explained Rex's behavior, noting the subtle cues that indicated detection. Rex is trained to detect traces, scents, and anomalies invisible to the human eye, Daniels said. In this instance, the dog has responded to a specific item previously deemed unremarkable. Emma observed his reaction and identified the focus point, which may guide further investigation. Jurors leaned forward, their curiosity piqued. Witnesses exchanged puzzled glances, reporters scribbled furiously, and families held their breaths. The courtroom had become a stage where intuition, innocence, and expertise converged. Emma's mother whispered softly, proud yet cautious, "Emma, you're helping, honey. That's very brave." The child smiled innocently, patting Rex gently. The dog responded with a subtle wag, acknowledging her attention. The courtroom, captivated by the unusual collaboration, remained silent, but attentive. Every adult understood that this moment was extraordinary, not merely for its novelty, but for the real impact it could have on the outcome of the trial. Detective Miller directed attention to the analyst's findings. If verified, this discovery could indicate a second participant or clarify key aspects of the burglary, he said. The prosecution adjusted their strategy, emphasizing the potential implications, while the defense cautiously prepared to counter any narrative that could disadvantage their client. The courtroom, previously dominated by standard legal procedures, had shifted into an arena of investigation, revelation, and anticipation. The remainder of the day was spent meticulously reviewing evidence, guided by Rex's behavior and Emma's observations. Each item the dog indicated was examined for relevance, and every subtle reaction was noted. Jurors leaned forward in rapt attention. Lawyers adjusted their notes, and reporters captured each step of the process. Emma remained focused, a small yet commanding presence. The courtroom had become a delicate dance of observation, training, and interpretation, where the smallest voice had the power to redirect the flow of information. By mid-afternoon, the significance of the discoveries became undeniable. Fabric, along with traces detected by Rex, provided connections previously overlooked. It became clear that Emma's simple observation had guided professionals to evidence crucial for understanding the crime. The victim's family watched, hope rising in their eyes. The accused's family whispered nervously, uncertainty and fear mingling. Every adult in the courtroom was reminded that insight can come from the most unexpected sources, sometimes from the innocence of a child and the instincts of a dog trained to reveal truth. Officer Daniels knelt beside Emma once more as the session neared its end. "You did something amazing today," he said gently. The child smiled, patting Rex's head, unaware of the monumental impact she had made. Rex's gaze remained vigilant, ears alert, body poised as if ready for further guidance. The day's events had transformed the trial, shifting focus from legal arguments alone to a unique collaboration between observation, instinct, and intuition. Judge Harris concluded the session. "The court recognizes the new developments and will incorporate this evidence into proceedings," he announced. The words reverberated through the room, carrying the weight of formal acknowledgement. Emma clapped her small hands softly, thrilled by attention and simple accomplishment. The courtroom had witnessed a profound intersection of innocence and professional expertise, a reminder that truth often reveals itself through unexpected channels. As the courtroom emptied, murmurs of amazement spread among reporters and visitors. The discovery had already begun to dominate conversation outside the courthouse. Families discussed the incredible impact of a child and a dog on legal proceedings. Jurors whispered about the unusual collaboration. Even seasoned lawyers acknowledged the uniqueness of the day. And at the center, a small child and a German shepherd had demonstrated the extraordinary power of perception, intuition, and trust. By the end of Part 5, it was evident that Emma and Rex were no longer peripheral players. They had become the catalysts for clarity in a trial that had seemed mired in ambiguity. A 3-year-old's innocent voice and a police dog's trained instincts had converged to reveal a hidden layer of truth, transforming the courtroom into a space where justice, perception, and intuition intersected in ways no one had anticipated. The story was no longer about procedure alone. It was about the extraordinary moments that emerge when innocence and experience collide. The courtroom was unusually quiet as the second day of revelations began. Emma, perched on her mother's lap, had become the unofficial center of attention. Her tiny hands rested nervously on her mother's skirt, yet her gaze was unwavering. Trained solely on Rex, the German shepherd, disciplined and alert, mirrored her intensity. Ears pricked, body taut with focused energy. Officer Daniels, aware of the heightened stakes, stayed close, ready to respond to the dog's subtle cues. Every movement Rex made, every slight twitch of his ears, was a potential clue. Detective Miller leaned in, quietly conferring with Daniels. "If we follow the dog's lead carefully, we may uncover something the original investigation missed. But we have to document it meticulously." Daniels nodded. They both understood the delicate balance between adhering to legal protocol and leveraging the extraordinary collaboration forming before them. The courtroom, unaware of the exact technicalities, simply felt the tension rising, an almost tangible anticipation that something unprecedented was about to unfold. The first witness of the morning was a forensic investigator tasked with re-examining the evidence identified the previous day. They began describing the significance of the fabric Rex had singled out. Upon reanalysis, the analyst explained, traces of a chemical compound were detected that aligns with materials found at a different scene of the case. This suggests either an accomplice or a previously unrecognized connection. A hush fell over the room. Jurors leaned forward, whispering to one another, while reporters furiously scribbled, capturing every detail. Emma, oblivious to the courtrooms. Gravity tilted her head slightly, observing Rex intently. She whispered softly to Daniels. "He sees it." Daniels looked at her, recognizing that her comment, while simple, perfectly encapsulated the dog's keen awareness. Rex, trained to detect subtle environmental cues and scents, and focused on an item overlooked by adults. The combination of the child's observation and the dog's trained instincts had uncovered a thread that could potentially unravel the entire sequence of events. The judge leaned forward, pen poised, eyes scanning the proceedings. "Officer Daniels, can you explain the dog's reaction in terms the court can understand?" he asked. Daniels calmly described Rex's training, highlighting the dog's ability to detect scents, recognize patterns, and respond to subtle cues that humans might miss. "Rex has reacted consistently to this type of evidence in the field," Daniels continued. Emma observed his reaction and helped confirm the focal point. While she cannot articulate the legal significance, her observation aligns with the dog's trained response, making this an important consideration for the investigation. The jurors exchanged glances, some nodding in understanding, others silently awed by the unusual collaboration. Witnesses, who had previously been confident in their testimony, now adjusted their posture, unsure of how this extraordinary element would factor into the case. The prosecution leaned forward, whispering among themselves about how the evidence could strengthen their narrative. Meanwhile, the defense subtly recalibrated, recognizing the challenge posed by a discovery that originated from a child's perception, rather than traditional testimony. Emma's mother whispered softly, attempting to maintain calm. "Emma, honey, just watch quietly." But the child's eyes never left Rex. She leaned forward slightly, whispering again to Daniels. He found it. The dog's body shifted imperceptibly, head tilting toward the corner of the courtroom where the evidence had been displayed. Daniels knelt beside the child, acknowledging her observation. "Let's document it carefully," he whispered. "We need to make sure the court sees exactly what Rex is reacting to." The forensic analyst approached the evidence, carefully analyzing the specific item Rex had indicated. Traces of the chemical compound were confirmed. Further tests revealed minute fibers matching other pieces of evidence collected from multiple locations tied to the case. The connection had been overlooked initially, but the combined perception of the child and the dog had brought it to light. The courtroom, filled with adults trained in law and investigation, could only watch in astonishment as an unlikely duo led the way. The prosecution immediately recognized the significance. "Your Honor," the lead attorney began cautiously, "this discovery could clarify inconsistencies in prior testimonies and reinforce our timeline of events." The defense attorney leaned forward, preparing to challenge the admissibility and credibility of the evidence. Judge Harris, however, allowed the continuation of proceedings, emphasizing that the investigation's integrity required careful documentation and transparency. The courtroom had become more than a venue for argument. It was now a stage where discovery unfolded in real time, led by a child and a dog. Officer Daniels guided Rex closer to the evidence table, careful not to rush or startle him. The dog's posture remained disciplined, movements precise, as if aware of the legal stakes. Emma's eyes followed every detail, pointing subtly whenever Rex indicated a reaction. Her voice, though soft, provided a clarity that adults struggled to articulate. The silent communication between them created a rhythm of observation and confirmation that was almost magical. Every adult in the courtroom, even seasoned professionals, was captivated by the unexpected synergy. Detective Miller quietly conferred with the prosecution. "We need to document every step. The child's observation, combined with Rex's reaction, provides an extraordinary lead, but it must be presented carefully to ensure its legitimacy." Daniels nodded, acknowledging the delicate nature of the situation. In the gallery, families watched in suspense, their hopes and fears intertwined with the unfolding events. The victims' relatives exchanged anxious glances, while the accused's family whispered nervously. The emotional weight of the discovery settled over the courtroom, palpable and intense. The child leaned forward once again, whispering, "He knows it's here." Daniels interpreted her words and guided Rex's attention to a small, overlooked corner of the exhibit. The dog responded instantly, nose twitching, ears alert, eyes fixed. The forensic analyst approached the area, confirming the presence of previously undetected evidence. Fibers matching the fabric traced to the secondary scene, fingerprints, and trace chemicals. Every detail aligned precisely with the observations that had initially puzzled investigators. The courtroom collectively held its breath. Judge Harris, pen poised, observed the meticulous proceedings. "The court acknowledges the unusual but significant developments," he said. "Evidence must be assessed carefully, but it appears a credible lead has emerged." Jurors leaned forward, whispering among themselves, absorbing the unfolding narrative. Witnesses, once confident in their earlier statements, now felt the subtle uncertainty that accompanies groundbreaking revelations. Even the reporters, seasoned in covering trials, were caught in a rare moment of awe and disbelief. Emma's mother whispered quietly, "You're helping so much, honey." The child smiled, unaware of the monumental impact she had already made. She patted Rex's head, and the dog responded with a gentle nuzzle, acknowledging her guidance. The courtroom, filled with adults trained to evaluate evidence, had become an arena of observation and intuition. A 3-year-old's insight, combined with a police dog's trained instincts, had uncovered connections that professionals alone had overlooked. The rest of the morning was consumed with careful documentation of Rex's reactions, Emma's observations, and the evidence's relevance. Each movement of the dog was recorded, each subtle signal from the child noted. Jurors absorbed every detail, trying to grasp the significance of the unusual collaboration. Witnesses repeated analyses with heightened awareness, and lawyers carefully adjusted their strategies, knowing that the courtroom dynamics had shifted dramatically. What had been a standard trial was now a story of revelation and unexpected insight. By mid-afternoon, the significance of the discovery was undeniable. The overlooked connections, identified through a combination of a child's keen observation and a trained dog's instincts, had clarified inconsistencies in previous testimonies. The prosecution recognized the potential to strengthen the case, while the defense struggled to adjust to an unanticipated variable. The courtroom, usually dominated by procedural formality, had become a theater of revelation, observation, and intense anticipation. Officer Daniels knelt beside Emma, whispering, "You've done something incredible today." The child's eyes sparkled, and she patted Rex gently. The dog remained vigilant, body tense, but controlled, ears alert to every nuance. Together, they had transformed the courtroom into a space where truth and intuition converged, where the smallest voices carried the weight of clarity. A day had revealed that extraordinary discoveries often emerge from the most unexpected partnerships. As proceedings concluded, the judge adjourned the court. The court acknowledges the developments and will allow further review of evidence indicated by Rex, he said. The murmurs in the gallery reflected awe and amazement. Jurors whispered quietly. Reporters prepared to cover the unprecedented collaboration, and families left the courtroom with hearts racing. At the center of it all, Emma and Rex had demonstrated the extraordinary power of perception, trust, and intuition. By the end of Part 6, the story had reached a crucial turning point. Emma and Rex were no longer simply participants. The courtroom had never felt so electric. Every eye followed Emma, the tiny 3-year-old whose simple words had thrown the proceedings into a tense, unprecedented focus. "Rex knows," she whispered again, her voice calm but insistent, drawing attention to the black German shepherd who sat alert beside Officer Daniels. The dog's ears pricked, body taut, gaze unwavering. It was as if the child and the dog shared an invisible line of communication. A silent conversation the adults could only observe, but not fully interpret. Detective Miller exchanged a brief glance with Daniels, both of them aware of the fragile balance they had to maintain. Any sudden movement or misstep could disrupt the delicate dynamic between Emma and Rex. The evidence they were about to reveal was critical, potentially case-altering, but it had to be presented carefully to ensure admissibility. They whispered, quietly, coordinating each step with precision. The courtroom itself seemed to hold its collective breath, sensing the tension without fully understanding its source. The lead forensic analyst returned to the witness stand, holding a small, seemingly insignificant item recovered from the scene. Upon further examination, the analyst began, this object has traces of fibers and chemicals that were previously undetectable without advanced testing. The implications of this discovery could change our understanding of the events in question. The courtroom murmured in subdued astonishment. Jurors leaned forward, reporters scribbled feverishly, and even the defense team sat forward, expressions a mixture of concern and curiosity. Emma's small fingers rose slightly, pointing toward Rex. He knows, she said again, almost as if repeating a mantra. Daniels knelt beside her, whispering, show us, Emma. Tell us what Rex is noticing. The child's eyes widened, scanning the area where the evidence had been laid out. Rex shifted subtly, nose twitching, ears swiveling, tail still but alert. Every trained observer in the courtroom recognized the significance. This was no ordinary reaction. The dog was signaling something meaningful, and the child was the bridge between instinct and discovery. Judge Harris leaned forward, pen poised, observing the exchange with growing curiosity. Officer Daniels, he said, voice steady, please explain the dog's behavior in detail. Daniels calmly described the meticulous training Rex had undergone, how the dog could detect odors and trace chemicals imperceptible to humans, and how small, involuntary movements often indicated a significant finding. In this instance, Daniels continued, Rex's reaction has been consistent, and Emma has accurately interpreted his cues. Together, they have identified evidence overlooked in previous examinations. The gallery stirred, whispers rippling through the room. Jurors exchanged puzzled glances. The notion that a 3-year-old could influence a criminal investigation in real time seemed almost impossible, yet the evidence supported the fact. Witnesses, who had once been confident in their testimonies, now looked uncertain, aware that they might have missed critical details. The defense team conferred quietly, realizing they faced an unprecedented variable, a child's perception intertwined with a trained canine's instincts. Daniels moved carefully, guiding Rex toward the area the child indicated. The dog's focus sharpened, nose low, tail twitching slightly. Emma leaned forward, whispering, it's here. Every movement was subtle, but trained eyes noticed the precise alignment of child and dog, the silent partnership that seemed to transcend ordinary communication. Detective Miller documented each action, noting the specific cues Rex responded to and how Emma interpreted them. This was evidence in its own right, demonstrating the collaboration that had led to the breakthrough. The forensic analyst knelt to examine the indicated item. This is remarkable, the expert said quietly, almost to themselves. Traces of substances match samples from both the primary and secondary locations. Without this lead, it's likely we would have overlooked this connection entirely. The courtroom collectively leaned in, the weight of the revelation settling over everyone. A 3-year-old and a police dog had uncovered what trained investigators had missed, a hidden piece of the puzzle that could determine the outcome of the trial. The defense attorney rose cautiously. Your Honor, he said, voice measured, we recognize the importance of the new evidence, but we request a careful review to ensure proper procedure was followed. The involvement of a minor and an animal. is highly unusual. Judge Harris nodded thoughtfully. The court will permit continued examination under supervision. All evidence must be meticulously documented, but the potential significance cannot be ignored. The decision set the stage for further revelations while maintaining the legal integrity of the trial. Emma's mother whispered softly to her daughter, attempting to calm the excitement bubbling within her. "Honey, just stay focused and watch Rex," she murmured. Emma nodded, eyes wide, as if understanding the gravity of the moment in her own innocent way. She leaned slightly, pointing precisely where Rex had indicated. Daniels observed every subtle cue, ensuring the dog's behavior remained steady. The courtroom's collective gaze followed the interaction, witnessing a silent partnership that seemed almost miraculous in its clarity and purpose. The next step involved carefully matching the fibers and chemical traces to known suspects and locations. The analyst confirmed that the newly discovered evidence aligned perfectly with items linked to the accused's activities. "This connection is clear," the expert said. "The child and the dog have identified something significant, something that alters the timeline and clarifies previously ambiguous events." The courtroom collectively reacted, some with shock, others with muted applause at the unanticipated clarity. The victim's family exchanged glances, hope rising in their eyes. For weeks, they had sat through procedural delays, contradictory testimonies, and inconclusive evidence. Now, a breakthrough had emerged in the most unexpected way. The accused's family whispered nervously among themselves, realizing the implications of the discovery. Jurors leaned forward, absorbing the significance, and even seasoned reporters found themselves momentarily silent, captivated by the unprecedented collaboration unfolding before them. Detective Miller conferred briefly with Daniels. "We should allow the child to observe without interference." Rex's instincts and Emma's insight had been accurate and effective. Further guidance may lead to additional connections. Daniels nodded. The child's intuition, unfiltered and pure, had become an essential part of the investigative process. The dog's trained responses provided confirmation, and together they revealed truths that human observation alone might have missed. The courtroom, once dominated by adult authority, had been quietly transformed. Emma, sensing the seriousness of the moment, leaned slightly, whispering again to Daniels. "He knows something else." Daniels carefully allowed Rex to follow. The new cue, guiding the dog to another item among the evidence displays. The dog's nose twitched, ears alert, tail poised. Jurors watched, captivated by the precision of the interaction. The forensic analyst approached, confirming that a previously overlooked piece of correspondence contained traces matching the fiber and chemical samples. Another critical connection had been revealed, shifting the trajectory of the case. The courtroom erupted into murmurs. Judge Harris, maintaining composure, acknowledged the significance. "All parties will review the newly identified evidence," he announced. Lawyers adjusted their notes, preparing for argument, while jurors whispered softly among themselves. Reporters clicked pens, documenting every detail. Families watched, some with relief, some with apprehension, but all captivated by the extraordinary scene. A 3-year-old child and a police dog, revealing hidden truths in a space dominated by adult authority. As the session neared its end, Daniels knelt beside Emma. "You've helped uncover something very important," he whispered. The child smiled, patting Rex gently on the head. The dog responded with a subtle nuzzle, acknowledging her guidance. Together, they had created a partnership capable of bridging innocence and expertise, intuition and training, perception and evidence. The courtroom had been transformed, if only temporarily, into a space where the most unlikely duo guided the search for truth. Judge Harris adjourned for the day. The court recognizes the significance of the new evidence and will consider its implications carefully," he said. The murmurs in the gallery reflected astonishment, awe, and wonder. Jurors whispered among themselves, reporters prepared their notes for extraordinary headlines, and families left with hearts pounding. Emma and Rex, though unaware of the full impact of their actions, had become the unexpected catalysts for clarity, justice, and revelation. By the close of Part 7, it was clear that the courtroom drama had reached its emotional apex. A 3-year-old's intuition, guided by a trained police dog, had uncovered hidden evidence, clarified inconsistencies, and shifted the trajectory of the trial. The audience, both inside and outside the courtroom, recognized that the smallest voices sometimes carried the most profound truths. The stage was now set for the story's resolution, where consequences, understanding, and justice would converge in ways no one had anticipated. The morning sun filtered through the courtroom windows, casting long shadows across polished wood floors as the final day of the trial began. Tension hung in the air, thicker than any silence Judge Harris had ever presided over. Emma sat quietly, on her mother's lap, her small hand resting against Rex's thick fur. The dog, disciplined and alert, sat like a sentinel, eyes scanning the room with measured vigilance. The events of the previous days had transformed the courtroom into something extraordinary. A space where innocence, instinct, and human law intersected. Officer Daniels knelt beside Emma, whispering reassurance. "Today we find out the truth," he said gently. The child nodded, her wide eyes reflecting a mixture of curiosity and quiet confidence. The dog responded to her presence, shifting slightly, nose twitching, ears alert. It was a silent communication the adults could not fully comprehend, yet everyone in the courtroom felt its weight. For the first time in the trial, all parties understood that what unfolded in the next moments would be decisive. The judge called the court to order, his gavel striking with authority. "We resume proceedings," he announced, with consideration of the newly discovered evidence and the observations provided by Officer Daniels, his canine, and the child witness. The room remained silent but expectant. Jurors leaned forward, eyes wide. Reporters scribbled furiously. Families, both of the victim and the accused, sat tensely, aware that the outcome might hinge on the extraordinary discoveries of a toddler and a police dog. Detective Miller directed Daniels subtly. "Follow the dog's cues carefully," he murmured. "Emma has been accurate so far, trust her observation." Daniels nodded, kneeling beside the child. The duo approached the evidence table, where the items Rex had previously indicated were arranged for careful examination. Emma pointed slightly, her small finger rising as if drawing a line in the air. "It's here," she whispered. Rex responded instantly, nose twitching, tail poised, eyes fixed on a single, overlooked envelope containing documents that linked the accused to the crime in a previously unverified manner. A forensic analyst stepped forward to confirm the finding. Upon detailed examination, these documents contain fingerprints, fibers, and chemical traces that corroborate the previously established evidence. This was a lead overlooked in initial investigations, but thanks to precise observations and trained detection, the connections are now clear. A ripple of astonishment moved through the courtroom. Jurors exchanged glances. Witnesses leaned forward. Reporters clicked cameras and scribbled notes. For once, a moment of revelation transcended procedural formality. Emma's mother whispered softly, pride shining through her concern. "You've been so brave, honey." The child smiled, glancing at Rex. The dog's ears flicked slightly, acknowledging the gentle praise. Officer Daniels recorded every movement, ensuring the chain of observation and evidence remained intact. Together, the child and the dog had bridged the gap between intuition and law, a partnership of innocence and trained skill that had delivered clarity the adults could not have achieved alone. The prosecution approached the bench, confident, yet cautious. "Your Honor," the lead attorney began, "this evidence, guided by Officer Daniels' K-9 and confirmed by the child, provides a crucial link establishing the accused's involvement. The chain of custody and discovery has been documented meticulously, and the impact on the case is significant." The defense attorney rose, attempting to maintain composure. "Your Honor, while the discovery is noted, we request careful consideration of the methods employed and their admissibility." Judge Harris nodded thoughtfully, maintaining balance between legal procedure and extraordinary circumstances. Rex, attentive as ever, moved slightly closer to the item, sniffing deliberately, while Emma leaned forward, whispering again, "He knows it's important." Daniels observed, careful not to interrupt the dog's natural response. Detective Miller documented the process, noting each cue, each reaction, and every word from the child. Jurors watched intently, some with awe, others with disbelief, as a 3-year-old's perception combined with a canine's trained instincts to influence the flow of justice. The courtroom, once a stage for argument, had become a place of revelation. The judge called for a short recess, allowing the attorneys to review the final implications of the evidence. During the pause, murmurs filled the gallery. Witnesses whispered excitedly. Jurors exchanged speculative glances, and families absorbed the emotional weight of the moment. Emma leaned against her mother, gently patting Rex, oblivious to the magnitude of her role. She only knew that the dog and she had worked together, and that somehow they had discovered something important. Her innocence lent a sense of purity to the proceedings that the adults could not replicate. Once the session resumed, the final testimonies were read aloud. The combination of previously overlooked evidence, verified chemical and fiber analysis, and the undeniable chain of observations from child and dog created a coherent, compelling narrative. The courtroom absorbed every word. The accused sat in tense silence, their lawyer whispering quiet counsel. The victim's family felt a mixture of relief and hope. Even the most seasoned reporters seemed captivated by the unprecedented collaboration between a child and a police dog, and how it had brought the truth to light. Emma, encouraged by Daniels, rose slightly on her mother's lap and pointed decisively. "He found it," she said simply. That single, unassuming declaration encapsulated weeks of investigation, uncertainty, and suspense. The courtroom, already aware of her previous contributions, leaned into the moment. Rex, disciplined but attentive, acknowledged the child's cue with a subtle nudge toward the envelope containing key evidence. In that instant, the connection between innocence and trained instinct became undeniable. Adults watched, realizing that justice often revealed itself in unexpected forms. Judge Harris, his expression measured yet visibly intrigued, addressed the court. The court recognizes the extraordinary circumstances of this case. Evidence has been corroborated, and the observations of a minor and a trained K-9 have provided critical clarity. Jurors, you will consider this evidence in reaching your verdict. The weight of responsibility shifted palpably. Jurors leaned forward, noting the extraordinary chain of discovery. The courtroom, previously dominated by legal argument, had been transformed into a stage of truth and revelation, shaped by intuition and innocence. As the jury deliberated, the courtroom remained tense with anticipation. Families whispered. Quietly, jurors huddled behind closed doors, and reporters waited with pens poised. Officer Daniels knelt beside Emma, patting Rex gently. "You both did amazing work," he said softly. The child smiled. The dog nuzzled her hand, and the room's atmosphere softened for a moment. Weeks of tension, investigation, and uncertainty had converged in a single extraordinary partnership that now defined the course of justice. Hours passed. Finally, the jury returned. Judge Harris called the room to order, his gavel striking the bench with gravity. The foreperson stood, voice steady. "Your Honor, we have reached a verdict." The courtroom held its collective breath. Families leaned forward, reporters scribbled furiously, and even the seasoned attorneys felt a tremor of anticipation. Emma, sensing the importance of the moment, clutched Rex's fur tightly, whispering softly, "We did it." The foreperson continued, "On the evidence presented, including the corroborated findings, guided by the observations of a minor and a trained canine, we find the defendant guilty as charged." A wave of emotion swept through the courtroom. Relief, joy, and even awe mingled in the air. The victim's family embraced, tears streaming, while the accused's family sat in stunned silence. Reporters captured every moment, recognizing the unprecedented nature of the trial and the extraordinary role of a 3-year-old and a German shepherd. Judge Harris nodded solemnly. The court acknowledges the verdict and commends the meticulous documentation and investigation that led to this outcome. Extraordinary circumstances have revealed extraordinary truth. The words carried weight, recognizing not only the legal victory, but the unique collaboration that had made it possible. Emma's mother hugged her daughter tightly, whispering, "You were amazing, sweetheart." Emma smiled, glancing at Rex, who responded with a gentle nuzzle, as if sharing the triumph. Officer Daniels knelt beside the child, voice warm. "You and Rex helped bring justice today," he said. Emma giggled softly, patting the dog's head. The courtroom, once tense and uncertain, now hummed with a mixture of awe, relief, and quiet celebration. Weeks of anxiety, investigation, and procedural rigor had culminated in an outcome guided not only by evidence, but by intuition, trust, and an extraordinary bond between a child and a dog. As the courtroom emptied, murmurs of amazement lingered. Reporters recounted the unprecedented collaboration. Jurors quietly discussed their experience. Families reflected on the extraordinary journey from confusion to clarity. And at the center, Emma and Rex, unaware of the magnitude of their impact, walked out with Officer Daniels, a small child and a loyal companion whose observations had shaped the course of justice. The world had witnessed an unforgettable moment, a reminder that sometimes the smallest voices reveal the greatest truths. By the end of Part 8, the story concluded with justice achieved, emotional stakes resolved, and Emma and Rex see